I am in Berkeley, California today to congratulate the 2009 recipient of the AIBS President's Citation Award, author of Omnivores Dilemma and In Defense of Food, Michael Pollan. Dr. May Berenbaum has selected you as recipient of this award because of your outstanding contributions in communicating the biological sciences to the public. Specifically, May would like to thank you for getting so many people to think about where their food has been before it arrives on their plate. Good morning, Michael. Thank you for joining
Good morning,
me.
Sherry. You're quite welcome. It's good to be here. Well, I would just like to start by saying that I regard this as one of the most special honors that I can remember receiving, because it's coming from the biologists that I depend on for my work. I've been using biology as a tool in my work for many years, going back to the Botany of Desire, or even Second Nature, my first book. And for me, I found that an understanding of biology is not just a conceptual tool, but it's a narrative tool. And what I've been very interested in is how, particularly the science of ecology, can help tell a story. Ecology and biology is all about connections. And that is indeed what's missing from a lot of our understanding of things as common as food, and that you can, the work that biologists like the people in this room do, for me, becomes a way to tell stories. And so to get recognition from a group of biologists, and particularly from a bee expert, as someone named Pollan, is very special. And I'm extremely grateful to the AIBS for this recognition.
So how did you discover that ecology provided such a great narrative thread for writing?
Well, it was really when I was working on Botany of Desire, which was my third book, and that was an attempt to look at coevolution and a recognition that, you know, our typical understanding of domestication is very one-sided and very blind, I think, to the reality that we don't just affect other species; they affect us. And that when I saw that drama unfolding, that when you look at grass, or if you look at the apple, you know, yeah, we select these plants, we choose which ones to graft and propagate, but they're choosing us too. And I think gardeners kind of, and I come into writing about biology, about science from the garden. I mean, as a passionate gardener, I think gardeners have some sense that their plants are doing a job on them too, and so we're kind of primed for this understanding. But my larger project is really trying to make Darwin's insights into the nature of life on Earth something we understand intellectually. I still don't think we feel it as individuals, and that goes for scientists as well as civilians. We still look at the world as a kind of Cartesian place where we're the only thinking consciousness, and we impose our will, and we stand outside of nature as acting subjects, and everything else is a passive object. That's Descartes' idea. It was overthrown by Darwin, but most of us still think that that's how it works. So my goal in telling these kind of stories about our implication in nature, about our engagement with other species, is an effort to make the Darwinian revolution something we really feel in our bones.
You're doing a great job with that. Your books are so compelling. I was blown away. Why do you think so little popular agriculture exists?
Well, you know, I think that's changing. I think there's a lot more interest in agriculture as a subject. I think that people for a very long time, I mean, we've spent 100 years in this country trying to get off of the farm. We've been shrinking the number of farmers. It's a matter of policy. We make fun of farmers. You know, they have been the butt of jokes in this country for more than 100 years. And it was all a very calculated strategy to take the really intelligent students off of the farm and send them to college and send them to the cities to have knowledge jobs, to work in factories, whatever it was. We really denigrated agriculture in this country. And it has taken us almost 100 years to realize how important farmers are, how critical they are for the health of the soil, for the health of the atmosphere, for the health of the population, to rebuild the prestige of agriculture as a subject worthy of study, as stories worthy of telling, and as people in our society who are just critically important to our welfare in so many different ways. I think the chefs had a lot to do with rebuilding the prestige of farmers beginning in the 70s, beginning here in Berkeley with someone like Alice Waters, who really shone a light on farmers as really important people in our society. And for my own part, though, I realized when I started writing about this that it was very hard to interest editors in New York in the subject of agriculture, and that they thought of agriculture as kind of been there, done that. You know, that's old news. But I found that if I talked about food, suddenly they were interested, because you know, people think they have no use for agriculture, but of course they have a great use for food, and they are the same thing. So merely by a change in nomenclature, and you'll see in my work I mostly talk about food, I don't talk about agriculture, you can make people even as disconnected as Manhattanites realize that they are implicated in the food chain, and that, like every other species, our place in the natural world is by and large dictated by our place in the food chain. So I think it's a challenge for storytellers to bring agriculture back as something that people want to think about, and indeed that is happening. I'm not the only one doing it. There's a whole generation of new writers on this subject, many of them coming out of this school, my students, who are writing, you know, spectacular narrative journalism about agriculture, but we call it food.
What have been the greatest rewards and challenges of writing about such an unusual niche topic?
Well, you know, the rewards of writing about a niche topic is you can master it to some extent and know a lot about it, and that's very satisfying. Every time I start another article, I have a base of knowledge, as somebody who has a graduate degree in the subject would have. I feel like I have that in food, so that's a great thing. The less great thing is you sometimes get a little trapped by that subject, and it becomes hard to move on because there's an expectation on the part of your readers that you will keep writing about this thing. You know, it's just the way culture works. People want you to repeat yourself over and over again. It's like the band being asked to play their first hit song over and over again. The culture never knows what it wants until it sees it. It assumes what it wants is what it liked before. I guess I would say that's the downside.
What inspired you to write Omnivores Dilemma? Was there a particular incident or series of incidents?
A couple things happened, a couple visits to farms, so-called farms, really got me going on the story. You know, I was living on the East Coast. I've grown up outside of New York, lived in rural New England for many, many years before I moved to California. And if you live on the East Coast, you have no idea what agriculture looks like in this country. I mean, our idea of a farm is rather small, family-run, you know, picket fences, maybe 100 acres, if that. And I had occasion, because of a couple stories I was working on for the New York Times Magazine, to visit a huge potato farm in Idaho, 5,000 acres, giant crop circles, each circle, you know, 135 acres, remote controlled, automatic pesticide, automatic fertilizer, automatic irrigation. Potatoes grown with so many pesticides that the farmers could not eat them during the growing season. They would grow a little bit of potatoes organically by the house. Pesticides so potent that the farmers would not go out to fix an irrigation pivot if it broke within 5 days of spraying with one pesticide in particular, because it was such a powerful neurotoxin. And then potatoes that after they were harvested had to sit in an atmosphere-controlled shed for 6 weeks until they off-gassed all the systemic chemicals that were in them. I saw this and I said, wow, I have no idea where my food comes from. I just didn't know how it was done. And then a year or two later, I had occasion driving down Route 5 in California from San Francisco to Fresno to pass through a cattle feedlot, a very large one, that comes right up to the highway. Stunning, hellish landscape of animals, black animals on black soil, which is really manure for as far as you can see, with a stench you just cannot describe. And in the background, seeing two pyramids, one of corn and one of cattle manure, and realizing what was happening there was we were transforming one pyramid into the other and making meat. And so there was your fast food meal, hamburger and French fries, and I realized they both came from a very mysterious place that most Americans hadn't visited. And that's when I decided following the food chain would be a worthwhile project.
Your book, Botany of Desire, sold very well. Did it prepare you for the phenomenal success of Omnivores Dilemma?
You know, as a writer, nothing prepares you for any success at all, because I think that the expectation when you publish a book is that it will be, you know, you'll be happy if it's politely received, gets a few nice reviews, and you find a few thousand readers. It is such a poorly understood and exceptional circumstance when a book kind of catches the wind of public attention and is propelled forward. It's a function not just of the book, but of where the zeitgeist is, what questions are in the public mind. You know, you start a book 3 years before you publish it. You have no idea where the culture is going to be when you drop that little message in a bottle, and sometimes you get lucky.
We know you have many fans. Have you had much opposition?
I do get some opposition. It's not as noisy as I would expect. I write controversial things. I've never been sued, knock on wood. You know, I hear from the biotech industry from time to time, but it's always pretty cordial. I hear from the Corn Refiners Association. I would say I hear from them more than anybody. These are the people who make high fructose corn syrup. So there's a little bit of pushback, but it's all in the spirit of debate, and it's never gotten ugly. I know other people who write about these issues who've had more of a problem with industry. But, you know, my defense is always that I check my facts really carefully, and I correct errors when I make them, and I try not to scream. You know, I try to explain things in a kind of patient way and not oversimplify. So I try not to give them weapons. But, you know, there's certainly critics out there. There are people who think I'm unrealistic in the direction I think we need to bring our food system. You know, but that's a debate I'm always happy to have.
In 1906, Upton Sinclair shocked the nation with his novel that showcased filth and contamination in the meat industry. His book ultimately led to the establishment of meat inspection standards. If you, by some supernatural set of circumstances, had an opportunity to talk with him in 2009, would you have any good news to share with him about the meat industry?
Wow, that's a tough one. You know, I teach Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, in my class, my food chain class, and I teach it alongside Eric Schlosser's book, Fast Food Nation. And the parallels are very, very interesting. In some ways, things are worse than they were in Upton Sinclair's time. In Upton Sinclair's time, there were unions in the meatpacking industry. You had, and there's a chapter where the hero of the book is, you know, getting involved with the union movement. Since that time, the slaughter industry has moved out of Chicago and moved to the High Plains to escape organized labor, and they are using, to a large extent, undocumented aliens, you know, Mexicans, to process our food. So from a labor point of view, things have gotten worse. These workers are absolutely at the mercy of these big packing houses. Concentration has gotten worse. There are basically 4 companies today processing 84% of the beef in this country. 13 slaughterhouses do all the beef, basically, in this country. Is it safer? Well, yes and no. You know, that we have microbes in the meat today, E. coli 0157H7, more lethal than anything that existed at the time of Upton Sinclair. And we've had a great many recalls because of that microbe, which is truly lethal, especially to children, in very, very small doses. So, you know, it's not a very happy picture of the progress we've made. Yes, we have more regulation, more inspection than we had then. But the power of the government to regulate the meat industry is very, very weak. The government cannot recall meat. They can only encourage companies to recall meat. So there's not that much teeth in this regulatory regime. What we have that we perhaps didn't have then is an alternative rising. We have a very vibrant local meat economy in many parts of the country. We have grass-fed meat being produced under you know, I mean, environmentally sustainable conditions, very high-quality meat. And so that this kind of you know, uprising of alternatives, a revolt of small producers against the system is really happening, and that's very good news.
What effect do you foresee our current economic conditions will have on the way Americans eat?
I think we're already seeing an impact from the economic conditions on the way Americans are eating. In some ways very good, in some ways very troubling. You look at some of the companies that are doing well, and you find that McDonald's is having very good seasons. And that is because a lot of people are trading down from better restaurants to McDonald's. On the other hand, you also see that more Americans are cooking, because an even better way to economize is to cook, is to make the time to cook from scratch, and you can save a lot of money that way. And people are doing it, and they're not just buying processed food, by the way. The bulk food bins are doing very well in the supermarkets today. So I think if people rediscover the kitchen, which they often do in times of economic troubles, that would be a very good thing for our health. And the other thing that's happening is people are gardening in much greater numbers. The numbers of gardens put in this year is something like 40%. There's certain seeds you can't buy. They're in such short supply. And of course, we have the First Lady of the United States, Michelle Obama, planting an organic vegetable garden at the White House, which I'm sure has inspired millions of Americans to take up the spade. Mm-hmm. So, and that's very encouraging, because if you plant a vegetable garden, you will improve your diet. You will eat vegetables. You will eat them at the peak of their nutritional and taste quality. So, you know, it's a mixed picture as ever, but there's some very encouraging things happening.
Did I hear some foreshadowing in there about a future book?
Well, I'm in the process of developing a couple ideas, and one involves cooking. The more I look at the whole problem of food in this country, the more I realize that the collapse of cooking is as much at fault as the rise of synthetic fertilizers or the rise of pesticides or the rise of monocultures. It is only because we stopped cooking that we could eat off of these giant monocultures of processed corn and soy that are the building blocks of processed food. So rediscovering the kitchen, which I'm in the process of doing myself, I think is a very important part of the solution. And by the way, there's a lot of very interesting science that happens in the kitchen. I'm learning about that as well.
So less than 2% of America's population lives on farm. Do you think farming has a future in this country? And what will farming of the future look like?
Farming definitely has a future in this country. You know, we forget that we don't eat without farmers, and no work done in this society is more important than the work of farmers. Will we outsource it to other countries? We're doing that to a certain extent, but I think we're also recognizing the dangers of doing that. That you lose control of your food supply as a regulatory matter, as a food safety matter, and that letting China feed us is probably a tremendous mistake. We also simply don't have the fossil fuel to continue importing food in the same amounts. I mean, it doesn't make sense for us to be catching salmon sustainably in Alaska, shipping it to China to be filleted, and then flying it back to California to be eaten. So we will need to be growing our own food as a matter of choice or a matter of necessity as fossil fuel diminishes. You know, one of the really, I tend to emphasize the half full part of the glass, and one of the most encouraging things is every 5 years the Department of Agriculture does a census of farmers. And for the first time ever, the number of farmers in this country has gone up by about 100,000. So that 2% figure might indeed change at some point soon. There are many, many young people who want to go back to the farms. There is an audience or a market of food consumers that are willing to support local farmers by shopping at farmers markets, joining CSAs, going to farms themselves. So, you know, we might in 10 years be surprised to find that it's 4% or 3% of Americans that are farming. And indeed, that is, we are not going to have a more sustainable food system without putting more people on the land. So I'm encouraged that as we increase the prestige of farming and the rewards to farmers, that we will have more of them.
So I'd like to shift gears a little bit and ask for your reflections on some broader questions about biology. Why does basic biological research, such as ecology and evolutionary biology, matter to our society?
Well, few things matter more than basic biological research, and I'm very concerned at the direction of biological research, that far too many resources have been privatized, and that we are doing the biology that yields the most intellectual property these days, and that should not be the only criteria for what gets funded. I work at a university, and I've seen the influence of the kinds of biological work that basically lead to products. Whether it's pharmaceuticals or genetically modified crops or whatever it is, it's things you can own. And the privatizing of the genome, I think, is one of the most dangerous things going on in our society today. The resources are going into genetics, and they're going out of whole organism biology. We're not putting the money into studying species, studying the relationships between species, studying energy flows, studying, describing. You know, we still have not cataloged the species that are out there, and that is not where the resources are going. So I think public support for research in biology is vitally important, because if we take biology down this path of only studying what we can own, what we can sell, you know, we may produce some wonderful drugs that way. We may produce some, you know, some important crops. But I think if we lose that basic kind of understanding of life and how the world works, genetics is, you know, quite glamorous right now. But I think that the deeper we go into it, the more we realize we don't understand, and that there's still very important knowledge to be gleaned from studying the interactions between species and their environments, and by cataloging and describing the life all around us.
You mentioned earlier evolution and how impassioned you are when you look at Darwin and becoming able to really understand and make evolution tangible in our lives today. How does an understanding of evolution help us to make better choices in our lives?
Well, evolution teaches us how we're connected. You know, we don't think of ourselves as participants in evolution, but of course we are. Every decision we make, that we eat this food, we don't eat that food, is an evolutionary vote. Humans are incredibly important forces of both natural and artificial selection. So one of my goals in my work is to show how we are implicated in evolution. Evolution is still going on all around us, and if you understand that, you will, for example, regard your relationship to meat animals in a very different way. You know, is eating meat a form of repression or oppression of other creatures, or is it indeed part of a co-evolutionary bargain between two creatures where the interests of both are advanced? So evolution is a very important frame. I mean, I couldn't resolve the question of whether it was within whether, you know, I could morally or ethically defend meat eating until I brought an evolutionary understanding to that question and realized that the domestic animals around us have a very special evolutionary bargain with us, and that they needed to be understood in that context.